stop scrolling for a second, because the story you're about to hear isn't loud. It doesn't start with screaming. It starts with silence. And sometimes, silence is where the deepest emotions hide. Before we begin, if you've ever lost someone, if you've ever felt alone in a room full of memories, if you've ever wondered whether life can still surprise you after heartbreak, subscribe to this channel now. Not because I'm asking, but because stories like this don't just entertain, they stay with you. Now listen carefully. This story doesn't rush. It unfolds slowly, and by the end, nothing will feel the same. Claire arrived at the lake earlier than she usually did, not because she had somewhere to be, but because staying home had begun to feel unbearable. For 2 years, mornings had carried weight. Not the kind you could see, but the kind that settled quietly in the chest, making even the smallest breath feel heavy. Since her husband died, the world hadn't stopped, but it had changed its tone. Everything felt louder, sharper, more demanding, and yet somehow emptier. The lake was the only place that didn't ask anything of her. She stepped onto the wooden dock slowly, as if she were afraid the moment might break if she moved too fast. The boards were already warm beneath her feet, kissed by early sunlight, and the air carried that unmistakable scent, fresh water mixed with pine, damp earth, and something that felt like memory. She laid her towel down carefully, smoothing it with deliberate hands. Small actions mattered now. They kept her grounded. The water stretched endlessly in front of her, calm like polished silver, reflecting the pale blue sky above. Clouds drifted lazily, unconcerned with time, unconcerned with grief. Birds called out to one another in the distance. Leaves whispered along the shore. Nature carried on effortlessly. Claire closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sun. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders loosened, just slightly. She listened to the gentle rhythm of water against wood, the faint laughter of children far away, sounds of life continuing not cruelly, but patiently. And for a brief moment, a fragile one. She felt light, as if time had paused, just long enough to let her breathe without remembering everything she'd lost. But memories have a way of finding you when you least expect them. Her husband's face came to her then. Not the sick version, not the hospital version. The man he had been before everything changed. The way he laughed, the way he held her hand without thinking, the way he made ordinary moments feel permanent. The ache returned familiar, dull, constant. She had survived these 2 years. But surviving wasn't the same as living. Her house had grown quiet, too quiet. Rooms echoed with absence. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with memories that arrived uninvited, sweet and cruel at the same time. And somewhere deep inside, Claire realized something painful but honest. She had learned how to exist, but not how to move forward. The lake hadn't always been a place of solitude. Once it had been laughter. She remembered afternoons when this dock had been crowded with life. When her husband sat beside her, their fingers intertwined, while their son Daniel splashed recklessly along the shoreline. Daniel had been fearless then, barefoot, carefree, laughing without hesitation. That version of life felt impossibly distant now. The longing tightened her chest. Her eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. Instead, she anchored herself to the present, the warmth of the sun on her arms, the soft towel beneath her, the subtle sway of the dock, the scent of water and trees. A flicker of contentment stirred, small but real. And then, footsteps. Light, careful, hesitant. Claire opened her eyes. Daniel stood a few feet away, holding 2 bottles of lemonade. For a second, she barely recognized him. Not because he looked unfamiliar, but because he looked grown, taller, stronger, more sure of himself, and yet still her son. "I thought you might want one," he said quietly. His voice carried something gentle, something steady, something that made her chest ache in a way that didn't hurt. She reached for the bottle. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but it sent warmth through her, unexpected, grounding. Human, not romantic, not strange. Just connection. She realized how long it had been since someone had done something so simple for her. Daniel sat beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty. It was shared, filled with unspoken understanding. With grief neither of them had known how to express. With love that hadn't disappeared, only changed shape. Claire looked at her son and felt something shift. Pride, sadness, hope, cautious but real. The sun climbed higher, scattering golden reflections across the lake. Daniel's gaze softened when he looked at her. And in that look, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Zine. Not as a woman who had lost her husband, not as someone fragile, but as his mother. Life, she realized, was strange that way. Grief and joy could exist in the same moment. "I used to come here with Dad," Daniel finally said. His voice was quiet but steady. Claire nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She remembered those days too. Fishing rods, packed lunches, safe laughter. A time when life felt complete. Daniel looked at her, then really looked at her. And she saw it. The same longing, the same unanswered questions, the same quiet hope that closeness wasn't lost forever. They began talking about small things. The weather, the ducks drifting across the water, the wind bending reeds along the shore. But small talk has a way of opening doors. And slowly, the conversation deepened. Daniel spoke about work, about pressure, about decisions that kept him awake at night. Claire listened, truly listened, not as someone trying to fix him, but as someone willing to understand. And for the first time, she saw him clearly, not the boy she had protected, but the man who had learned to carry weight quietly. She shared her own truth then, the empty nights, the silence, the loneliness she hadn't known how to name. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. He listened with respect, the kind that comes from love, not obligation. The dock felt like its own world, a place where past and present touched gently. Claire noticed the small things, how Daniel adjusted the towel so she'd be comfortable, how he poured lemonade carefully, how he glanced at her, checking, always checking. Her heart swelled. Despite everything, they had found their way back to each other. They shared memories, funny ones, painful ones, moments that reminded them of who they had been and who they still were. The weight in Claire's chest began to lift, not disappear, but soften. Life, she realized, didn't always heal loudly. Sometimes healing arrived quietly, in shared silence, in gentle gestures, in footsteps on a dock. She took a long sip of lemonade, cool, sweet, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. But what Claire didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that this peaceful morning, this quiet reconnection, was only the beginning. Because before the day was over, something would surface, something buried, something unresolved. And once it did, nothing between them would remain the same. The conversation slowed again, not because there was nothing left to say, but because both of them felt it, that subtle pressure in the air that comes right before something important is spoken. The lake remained calm, unaware of the quiet storm forming between them. Daniel stared at the water longer than necessary. Claire noticed. A mother always does. She had learned to read his silences long before he learned how to explain them. "You've been thinking about something," she said gently. Daniel's jaw tightened for a moment. He exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "There's something I've wanted to tell you," he said. For a long time, her fingers curled slightly against the towel. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush him. She waited. "I didn't know how," he continued, "and I didn't want to hurt you." Claire's heart began to pound, not with fear, but with awareness. Some truths announce themselves before they're spoken. "You can tell me," she said softly. Whatever it is. Daniel nodded, but his eyes didn't meet hers yet. When Dad died, he said, I tried to be strong. For you. Her breath caught. I thought that was what you needed. Someone solid. Someone who didn't fall apart. His voice wavered slightly. But the truth is, I was falling apart too. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. I didn't want to add to your pain, he said, so I stayed quiet. I left more. I buried things. She reached for his hand without thinking. He let her. I thought if I kept moving forward, it would all catch up eventually, Daniel said. But grief doesn't work like that. He finally looked at her then, and in his eyes, she didn't see a man pretending anymore. She saw her child. I missed you, he said. The words landed harder than anything else he could have said. I was right here, she whispered. I know, he replied. But we were both hurting, alone. The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was honest. Claire squeezed his hand, grounding herself in the reality of him warm, present, real. I didn't know how to let you see me broken, she admitted. I thought I had to be okay. For you. Daniel shook his head slowly. We didn't need to be okay, he said. We just needed to be together. The realization hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. They hadn't failed each other. They had simply been scared. Scared of reopening wounds. Scared of making things worse. Scared of feeling everything again. Claire felt something loosen inside her, a knot she hadn't known how to untie. You didn't lose both of us, she said quietly. I was just lost for a while. Daniel's lips curved into a small, relieved smile. So was I. They sat there as the morning shifted into afternoon, the sun warming everything it touched. The lake sparkled differently now, brighter, more alive. Not because the world had changed, but because they had. Claire noticed how light her chest felt. The grief was still there, it always would be, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge, a reminder of love that had existed and still did. Daniel stood after a while, offering his hand. Come on, he said. Let's walk. She took it. As they stepped off the dock together, Claire realized something profound. Healing didn't arrive with answers. It arrived with connection. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, intentional, human. And as they walked along the shoreline, side by side, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not happiness, but readiness. Readiness to live again, to feel again, to move forward not alone. She glanced at her son, walking beside her, and smiled. The lake behind them remained calm, holding their reflections just a moment longer before the ripples erased them. But the moment itself, that stayed. And Claire knew without question that sometimes life doesn't heal you by giving you something new. Sometimes it heals you by bringing you back to what was always there.